G'day and welcome to the Grow a Small Business Podcast. I'm your host, Troy Truen. Each week, we speak with an owner who has grown a business with 5 to 30 team members to something bigger. Diving into their numbers and unearthing the pain they've experienced, we explore what they did to overcome each barrier and what they would do differently from day one. Let's get into it.
Well, Darryl, thanks so much for making the time to catch up with us today. You're a researcher, academic and consultant who has worked a lot in businesses with a specialisation around trust. And I guess as we were just talking before I started recording the podcast, trust to me is such an important aspect of business and running business, whether that's building trust with clients, building trust with investors, or building trust with team members. It really can make the difference between a high performing business and a poorly performing business. So I guess as a starting point, would you be able to give me a little bit of an introduction to who you are and tell me from your perspective, what is trust exactly?
It's such a pleasure to be here, Rob, and to be with your listeners. It's a great question. And one of the struggles we have is around a lack of awareness about what trust is exactly and who we trust and how much we trust them. Trust is, there's a lot of research that shows that it's one of the primary drivers of success for organizations. It creates resilience in their customer base. It leads to higher employee engagement, higher returns to shareholders. The research is pretty clear that being able to build trust is one of the key differentiators for organizations. It allows them to retain staff. They're not as dependent on external factors. It's one of the things that we can take control of to drive success for our companies. And so the question you ask is, what is trust? Well, trust is the willingness to be vulnerable when you can't completely determine what someone else is going to do. And so there's an element of uncertainty and vulnerability there. And when we're deciding to trust someone, we ask ourselves two fundamental questions. The first is, how likely am I to be harmed, which is perceived uncertainty? And the second question is, if I'm harmed, how bad is it going to hurt, which is perceived vulnerability?
Yeah. No, that and I guess you've already answered a big part of the second question I had, which is, why is trust important? And I guess if we look at it from perhaps a more practical point of view, what are some of the things that a small business owner can do to enhance the trust? And why don't we start from the perspective of clients and customers? How do you help build the level of trust in you and your organization?
Well, so if we start off by thinking that uncertainty and vulnerability are the two primary factors that drive the trust decision, it's uncertainty times vulnerability gives us a level of perceived risk, and we each have a threshold of risk that we're comfortable with. And if we go beyond that threshold, we don't trust. If we're beneath it, we do. Which means that building trust means, how do I reduce uncertainty so that you're more comfortable? Or how do I understand and manage your levels of vulnerability early in the process? Because if we think about early relationships, they tend to have high levels of uncertainty, which means we can only tolerate small ranges of vulnerability. And as we come to know each other better, that uncertainty starts to decline, and the range of vulnerability we can tolerate starts to get broader. Yes. So larger organizations sometimes benefit from a global reputation or huge marketing campaigns or those kinds of things that reduce uncertainty. Smaller places need to be more focused on how they can engage customers early on to get not only their business, but the referrals from that business. And so how can we allow customers to take small steps first? So little bits of vulnerability.
Yeah.
And then once they've engaged with us and had a positive experience, they're willing to do it again. And I wrote a book in June called Building Trust, Exceptional Leadership in an Uncertain World. And I tried to lay out everything in there. I think that there are 10 levers we can pull, and 4 of those are within the uncertainty domain. 3 of them are us, because uncertainty comes from us as individuals or organizations. And it also comes from the context that we're embedded in. And so to the extent that we can make people comfortable with us or further explain our context to them, it reduces their uncertainty. Now, the 4 levers that I think about in the uncertainty bucket, 3 of them are from us as individuals, and those are the most popular. They're benevolence, integrity, and ability. So benevolence is, do you have my best interest at heart? Will you act in my best interest, even if it's not in your own short-term best interest? Integrity is, do my actions line up with the values that I express? And do I follow through on the promises that I make? And then ability is, do I have the competence to do what I say I'm going to do? And then the 4th lever is the context. How well can I, because a lot of times our behavior is driven by the formal and informal mechanisms of social control that constrain us. I used to ask participants in my workshops, I'd say, if you could be anywhere doing anything with anyone at this moment, how many of you would be sitting here with me? And I stopped asking that, Rob, because it was not good for my self-esteem. So I would say to people, why are you here then? And usually it was the context, right? I need to get this degree, or I've got this problem, or I'm struggling with something. There's something going on in my life that has driven me here to sit with you for 2 days or a few hours at a time for a few weeks.
Yeah.
And so what I tend to do is I tend to explain these levers to folks and then talk to them about how to pull them. Because, those who aren't very good at building trust have a lever that they pull. Usually it's the ability lever. I have these kinds of credentials, this much experience, this sort of background. But they don't include the other party in that definition of excellence, right? So if I was thinking about what makes a really good host or a really good guest for Rob on his podcast, I'd be thinking I need to be, interesting. I need to tell some stories so people are engaged, but I also need to leave people better than I found them. So they need to walk away feeling like there's things that they can do. And so that's my definition of what good looks like. But if I really wanted to know what good looked like as a podcast guest, I'd include you in the conversation, and we'd have some of your listeners chime in to say, this is what a really good guest looks like. Yes. So I can't pull that lever. I can try, but I can't pull that lever as effectively as I might if I don't include other people in the conversation. And the same comes for benevolence. We may have somebody's best interest at heart, but if it doesn't land, it's one thing for me to think I'm acting in your best interest, but unless you really believe it, it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, the example I give is, say somebody's walking past, they see you and I sitting having dinner, and I'm about to dig into this really decadent dessert, and they go, "Oh my God, Darryl, you're not going to eat that, are you?" And their intent is really benevolent. They care about my health and are concerned. And what they don't realize is that this body doesn't just happen, right? There's years of neglect involved. There's, some really poor decisions. This is not going to be the first or the last time that I do something foolhardy with my health. And so it misses me. Yeah. But if they had actually had a conversation with me around, where I told them, I'm concerned about my health, I'm heavier than I'd like to be, then they could come alongside and say, wow, you told me you wanted to lose weight. This doesn't look like it's going to help. That lands differently.
Be the change you want to see in your business. Become more productive and less stressed with our free Transform Your Performance online course. Once you see the benefits, put your entire team through the course at no cost. We start out by telling you the secret to guaranteed success, then over 100 lessons help you be more focused, present, productive, and feel more in control about work. growasmallbusiness.com.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I guess to a certain extent, if I'm understanding this correctly, that comes back to context a little bit as well in terms of when and how they make those statements or have that conversation with you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm thinking it might be worth just exploring I guess a bit of a case study around this. And I'm thinking of a law firm that I worked with not so long ago that were
Right.
involved in property conveyancing transactions. They received a lot of referrals from real estate agents. And
Okay.
at one point, they had some mistakes happen, and there were a few problems in some of the files. And I guess it just came down to human error, probably a lack of training in a couple of the staff members. And all of a sudden, the trust with the real estate agents evaporated.
Right.
And they stopped getting the referrals, which really put their business at risk. I'm just curious to know, I guess, in that sort of highly simplified example, what would be your recommendations around how they might work to rebuild that trust once it's I wouldn't say it was gone forever, but it was certainly
Right.
damaged.
Yeah, and this is an interesting challenge. I mean, I wrote my doctoral thesis at Duke in the business school there on building trust in hostile environments. And part of that comes from, failed expectations. It can lead to us having disappointment and then a negative story about the other party. A lot of times what I recommend is an apology combined with an acknowledgement of the harm that was caused to the other party. And
Yeah.
it may or may not be that we were the ones who did it.
Yeah.
But then being able to tell the story, or sort of try to have the empathy of telling the story of the real estate agents in this instance, saying, this is what happened for you. This was your experience. This is how it made you look for your customers. This is the damage that did. Here's the steps I'm going to take to try to ensure that doesn't happen again. And here's how I'm going to create more transparency in the process. So I would lean in the context and around ability to say, this is what good looks like, and we haven't hit it. And our intent is to be the most reliable, the best. And here's the steps we're taking to achieve that. And so the one thing we don't do is we don't make promises that it'll never happen again. Right? Because that's the go-to for most of us, is to overpromise particularly when things have gone wrong. And then it becomes an integrity problem where we've made a commitment that we can't follow through on, we don't have control over. What we can do is talk about the process that we're going to adopt, the steps we're going to take to reduce the likelihood of this occurring again, and perhaps a mechanism for saying, here's how we're going to try to make this right for you.
Yeah.
So you've suffered a loss of face with your clients. We're going to send a letter apologizing to your clients that you can share with them, acknowledging that it was our mistake, not yours. Here's the steps we're going to take to try to rebuild your reputation. And some of this comes down to this benevolence piece, right? Is understanding what the best interests of their clients are, and then making a strong commitment to serve that best interest and include them in the process of getting better. That's the approach that I would recommend.
Yeah, that sounds really practical and useful. And I think, what I particularly take away from what you've just said is really trying to focus on the things you can have control over, rather than just making brash promises about that everything's going to be perfect.
Right.
As much as anything, because I think clients can often see through that and go, oh, well, here's just another bunch of words. Whereas if you're really clear on, look, here's the things I can control and I'm going to control them, probably adds a level of authenticity to what you're saying. So,
right. And here's the steps we're going to add to make this more transparent.
Yeah.
So that you're going to have a little more control over this process than you had in the past.
Yeah.
I remember when Ford Motor Company was bailed out in the US, and they said, well, now we'll make good cars. And I was outraged. I was like, you mean you knew you were making crappy cars and you knew how to make good cars? And this whole time you've just been selling us crap. So I think, trust is one of the variables that drives success for organizations that we can actually do something about. And, there's some challenges that we face, because a lot of times when I talk to people, there's a lack of awareness about who they trust and how much they trust them. There's this feeling like it's fuzzy and indistinct and that we can't do anything about it. It just is what it is. None of that's true, and 95% of people believe they're more trustworthy than average, which, aside from just being impossible, also means that when there's a trust problem and they do recognize it, they assume it's somebody else's issue to deal with. They don't take control of it themselves. And so, when we start thinking about factors that drive success for small businesses like the ones you're focused on, building good relationships, having that sort of people having a narrative about you or a story about you that's resilient and positive, where they give you the benefit of the doubt, it allows you to survive when there's external shocks that you have no control over. When COVID comes along, or when government changes regulations, or when a new competitor enters the market, you get the benefit of the doubt. And people actually come and talk to you about, their thoughts about leaving, because they have a sense of loyalty to your firm, your organization. They give you a chance to make things right rather than just leaving.
Yeah, I think there's some really good points there. Darryl, I guess this conversation has skimmed over a very deep and important topic, but it's given us a little bit of an insight around what trust is and why it's important. If people want to find out more details, particularly about your work and trust, where can we go to find out more?
So you can go to my website, trustunlimited.com, and there's a blog section in there that's got a number of articles and podcasts that people can access for free. Right. So my aspiration is to make the world a better place. We're facing some really big, hairy problems in the world, and we need collective collaborative action to solve them. And trust levels are at the lowest we've ever seen. And so I wrote my book so that people could get a clear sense of how the model works, how trust works, and a better sense of how to pull these different levers that I talk about. So if they wanted to buy the book, they can get it anywhere online. And I'm hoping that they'll not just buy it, but read it and start applying the concepts, because it's something we can actually get better at. Yeah. Fantastic. They can also email me at Darryl@trustunlimited.com if they want to reach out.
Brilliant. I appreciate you being so generous with the information. And like I say, such an important topic, and really appreciate the work that you do. Fantastic.
Thanks, Rob.
Well, thanks for joining us, Darryl. And I think we might have to have some more conversations to dive into this a little bit more deeply.
Yeah, I'd love that.
And for our audience, we'd greatly appreciate a review in iTunes or whatever platform you listen to us on. More reviews means we bubble up higher in iTunes, etc., so more business owners looking for podcast help with their growth will find us.